Hello everyone, welcome to this video all about quoting evidence effectively from texts. This could help for English language, but it could also help for English literature because of course in both courses you're going to require to engage critically with what the writer has said. This might also help for GCSE but also for A-level as well because again it's the same thing. So in this video we're going to be talking about the problems that examiners face time and time again with students using quotations. We're going to discuss when to use a quote and how to embed a quote. And I'm going to finish the video by showing you some poor examples of using evidence in analysis, but then also finish by showing you some better examples. Okay, so this video is all about how to use references and quotes effectively. So examiners and exam boards state that there are recurring problems and issues with students when they are using quotations from the text. And the biggest bugbear that I have developed lately is that quotations are often too long. So your teacher might have a rule in their classroom where they ban you from using quotes that are longer than 5 words long. And I see actually that's quite a good thing to do maybe. If you are writing quotes which are 4 lines long, which I've seen recently, you're wasting your time. You're not going to get any marks for it. You need to move away from using those long quotes because there's no marks available in this course for copying. So another issue that exam boards see is that quotes often don't support the point that students are making. So there's a disconnect between the point that they're making and the reference that they select. Sometimes students, particularly with language analysis, they are too distracted by language techniques and feature spotting. And in doing so, they actually can lose focus of the task. So the task will be very specific. The golden rule for English is to always answer the question. And sometimes what students will do is they will quote a word, but that word won't really have anything to do with the question you're asked. Sometimes students will also define a technique after giving a quotation, which is unnecessary. You don't need to tell a qualified English examiner what a simile is. They know. And another issue is that sometimes students will leave quotes hanging, which means that they will plonk a quote into a paragraph, but then not talk about it. So it's a bit slap bang. So when you're quoting, the assumption is that you're going to analyse or evaluate something in that quote afterwards. That's why you're quoting it for. If you just leave a quotation in the middle of nowhere, hanging in midair, the examiner is going to go scratching their head and ask, well, what's that there for? Okay, so this is not necessarily what I see, although I'm sure I have seen it in my career, but it's what exam boards are saying to teachers to say you need to be aware of how students are using evidence. So going back to what I just said, the main reason why we make references in English and in other written-based subjects really is because that those quotes are important in what we're saying. And the anticipation is that when you quote something, you're going to then analyse and evaluate something in that quote afterwards. You're not going to just plonk a quote in and then move on and talk about something else. It's not enough just to simply quote. You have to engage with that quote critically. And this can often be the difference between a grade 3 and a grade 4, for example, at GCSE, or the difference between an E grade and a C grade at A-level, for example. So it's important to use your evidence as best you can. Short quotes always work best. It makes your writing clearer, your analysis sharper, more perceptive and more precise. So if you haven't been told to keep your quote short, this is the advice that I'm giving to you now. Do not waste time writing or copying large quotes out from extracts. It will get you nowhere. So talking about embedded quotes, what we mean by embedded quotations is that the quotation or the evidence that you are using flows within your existing sentence. So you can see on the left-hand side here, the phrases roaring winds and vicious rain flow within the sentence that I've written around it. The sentence doesn't stop for me to quote. That's different to the examples that we see on the right-hand side of this screen, where the quotations are non-embedded. So roaring winds and vicious rain, both are followed by full stops. It's very kind of stop and start. It's not flowing nicely. And the same thing in the bottom example there about the bungalows. Another thing to notice about the bungalows example is that the quote is too long. That's a quote that's far too long. But it's also, they're not engaging with that quote afterwards. They're just writing one of these kind of waffly throwaway comments, which is it creates imagery, which is, for me anyway, quite frustrating to read from students when they say things like it makes the reader read on, or it grabs the reader's attention, or it creates imagery. It's not enough to say those things. And I'm not quite sure where students learn them from, because at GCSE at least, it's not language, it's not analysis that's compatible with any kind of success at GCSE. So we need to be moving away from those kind of hollow phrases that students sometimes make. So an example here, another example of how not to use evidence. So there are things which are wrong with this paragraph in terms of how they have used references from the text. So on the right hand side, I've got some questions here that might prompt discussion or might prompt you to look at this example critically. But I think it's always important to show students an example of something that isn't quite good enough and could be improved, because then you know what it is that you are trying to avoid. So parts of this response are okay, and it would get some marks, but I'm not sure it's going to get marks which are compatible with a pass, for example, at GCSE, that all-important grade 4. So the student says, in this extract, the writer uses multiple short sentences. To support this, in the text it says, a free kick to City inside our half. All eyes followed the ball as it arched in towards our goal. This is to make the reader to have imagery and would make the reader want to carry on reading. Another technique the writer uses is the adjective. So I've copied this straight from the exemplar material, and as you can see, it doesn't make sense. To support this, the writer says players collided with a sickening crack and plummeted to the ground. The adjectives sickening and plummeted are used to help picture in the reader's head what and how the football match is going. So you can pause the video now and discuss or just think about what is wrong with this answer or how this answer could be made better. Or you can carry on watching and we can discuss further by going through the answers. So the first thing that the student says is they want to talk about multiple short sentences. That's the technique that they want to talk about. However, they follow this with a quote in yellow there. That quote about the free kick is far too long. So there's a disconnect here between the technique that the students chose and the quote, because that quote does not prove that it's a short sentence. I would actually call that kind of a mid to long sentence. So I'm not quite sure what is short about it. So that's going back to what we said earlier. There's a disconnect between the point and the evidence given. That quote there in yellow is then followed by what I would call kind of a throwaway comment to make the reader have imagery. When an examiner reads that, they will say something like, well, yes, but what imagery? You're not actually telling me what imagery. Could be imagery of anything. How do I know? So it's not specific enough. And it shows the student perhaps has a tentative relationship with the text or with the topic of language analysis. And again, you've got that personally irritating phrase in green, would make the reader want to carry on reading. And I would go, well, does it really? Does it? You know, I'm not sure it does. So it's again one of those annoying, hollow statements that students sometimes make in English. If you're going to get the grade 4, we need to move away from making those kind of statements because they're not going to do anything for you. So that they're unhelpful. And like I said earlier, I'm not quite sure where students get them from. But at GCSE at least, they're not useful at all. The second quote is a bit better in the sense that it's still a bit too long. So the student could do with shortening it to between 1 to 5 words again. But what's probably most impressive, for me at least, about this answer is the way in which they zoom into the adjective sickening and the verb plummeted, which is an example of some better approaches to language because they're zooming in. The problem is that it's quickly let down by this kind of throwaway point at the end, which is about imagery again. So they're falling back on imagery as an effect, but they're not saying what imagery. And they also say, and what and how the football match is going. And the examiner would go, well, and how is it going then? Tell me. So there's a hesitancy there in actually dealing with the detail of the substance of the extract. There are other bits of this which I don't like, and which the examiner would not like either, and those are the sentences that I have put in red. I have called this filler. Things that students will write which they don't need to write. So, for example, in the text it says, well, we know it's the text because the examiner knows you're writing about the text in the exam paper. And they will also say things like, to support this, the writer says. Well, again, by quoting, you are supporting your point. You don't need to tell them that you are supporting a point. So again, it's not only the analysis which is lacking, but it's also the student is wasting a lot of time by writing this kind of filler and also writing long quotes. And if this paragraph had taken a student 10 minutes, they've spent 10 minutes writing about the wrong things, essentially. They should have spent 10 minutes talking about analysis of the extract and meanings rather than using sentences which are filler and long quotes. So that is what's wrong with this paragraph and what we would need to avoid to make it better. So on this next slide, I've got that example in pink at the top, but underneath I've taken the same paragraph and put it in a way which would be more impressive and much more successful in terms of the mark scheme. So in this extract, the writer conveys the sense of suspense the spectators of the football match feel. When the writer mentions all eyes followed the ball as it moved towards the goal, readers await to see if the team scores and may be entertained by the sense of competition between the players. The language may also be engaging for readers when the writer mentions the sickening crack when players collide and how they plummeted to the ground. The adjective sickening suggests the players are at risk of serious injury. The onomatopoeia helps readers hear the sounds of bones breaking, which is both disturbing and violent. The aggression of the players is emphasised with the verb plummeted, suggesting great force and speed, which could be dramatic to witness as a spectator. So much more specific, but the quotes are a lot shorter and embedded. Okay, so that's underneath there in that white box is an example of how to do it better. So to show you some other low mark examples, the writer also uses smaller sentences when the game gets more serious to add suspension. I think they mean suspense. For example, the winning goal suddenly became important. No more laughter, no more joking, everybody working. And then that's it. And the examiner's going, well, you've quoted this long quote, tell me more. On the right-hand side, the writer also details briefly how useful the telephone is. There is no reason why a man should not hold a conversation with a son of the Antipodes. This informs the reader to know how useful the telephone can be, such as talking to people across the world. So what they've done there is they've basically just repeated the quote in their own words. They're not analysing the quote or looking at words inside the quote. So both of those quotes are too long, but there's also a lack of individual analysis following the quotation of them. So in this left-hand side example, if they've quoted that, the student is saying to me, well, this must be important then. I expect them to now talk about some words in that quote, but they don't. So that quote becomes undermined. It becomes just filler, really. I don't know why it's there for. They're not analysing it at all. Two more examples. Again, both of them are too long in terms of quotations, but this is just to show you two of those frustrating throwaway comments that students make at the end of it. This makes the reader want to read on. Well, why? There's no why there. And on the right-hand side, this creates imagery, which is interesting. Well, what imagery? Why is it interesting? How might it appeal to people? What will it make people imagine or think or feel? There's nothing there about actually analysing these quotes. So it's not really doing what it's supposed to do. To show you, I think, a couple of high mark examples or some better examples of how to quote, the writer begins the text by describing how a new discovery has come happily during a time when dreary feelings had arisen that the original discoveries had come to an end. This is the pleasure telephone for the Pearson 2.0 course. The writer's use of the adverb happily in conjunction with the adjective dreary is effective at grasping the reader's attention into wanting to learn more about the discovery that was able to change the current landscape for scientists. So that's much better. Techniques, embedded quotes. The quotes are short and judiciously and carefully chosen. And there's also an attempt here to talk about the evaluation, the analysis of this language. And another one, furthermore, the author uses the metaphor people became giants to illustrate to the reader the incredible sense of pressure and claustrophobia he felt during the race. The metaphor of the noun giants outlines that the author felt intimidated and small, which reflects his thoughts on the situation. This sentiment of being pressured interests the reader as it makes them wonder whether he will escape. So again, there's an emphasis there on why something might create a certain feeling. Short quotes as well. And finally, the last example I've got to show you of a higher mark example. Furthermore, the writer is successful in making the bicycle race seem exciting and entertaining, as it shows me the rider's competitiveness, which makes it more entertaining. This is shown through the phrase sprinting all the time, which showcases the rider's determination to win the race. This makes the reader entertained as they can watch the rivalries of the riders, which would make it more exciting due to the foregrounding of suspense and tension as we await the outcome. So the confident analysis there, using words like foregrounding, for example. So those examples that I've showed you are more successful because the quotes are shorter and there's more analysis of the effects. If the student had simply copied, 4 lines from the extract, it would not have been anywhere near as successful. So those are all GCSE examples from the Pearson 2.0 specification. So that video is all about how to use evidence effectively. In summary, remember to use short quotes and select them carefully, and to make sure that your quotes are embedded where possible, and to also make sure that you write much more analysis rather than just simply copy long quotes out from the extract. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck in your studies.